I'm John Byrne with AML Right Source. With me today is Stephanie Champion. Stephanie is the Executive Vice President, Head of Financial Crime Technology at Nasdaq Verafin. And among the many things that they work on, they recently released a report, Financial Crime Insights, the 2024 Global Financial Crime Report. And we wanted to talk to Stephanie about some of the information in there. So first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking time today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me, John.
All right, so let's start off this way. There's a number of things in the report that I'd like to hear you talk a bit about, and obviously people they can download the report, go on the website, provide their contact information, and they should definitely do that and go through this. I've always felt with these sort of reports, it's both useful from a training perspective, but also from basically a gap perspective. What are your institutions doing? What do your colleagues think are the main concerns? So first of all, let's talk about some of the dollar amounts that are in this report. They're obviously mind-blowing, to say the least. You have, and again, these are 2023 numbers in your report. These are over 750 billion in money laundering activity and illicit funds through Europe's financial system. What are some of the highlights in terms of countries identified there? And you guys look at it as the percentage of GDP. Why don't you give us insight to some of those responses?
Absolutely. Well, John, just to set a little context as well as to, the part that we play in the ecosystem and kind of, why we felt that we wanted to invest in this report and kind of highlight some of the findings. We've been in business now for 20 years. So specifically dealing with customers to help solve for the problems that exist across the financial crime landscape. So again, I know, we've shared this earlier. I've been a part of Verafin since 2009 when we were less than 40 employees and a handful of customers at the time. And we now have over 2,600 financial institutions that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So just an incredible journey for us. We represent more than 10 trillion in assets across those customer base. So we just have a really unique place in that ecosystem and are able to really provide really interesting insights as to what we're seeing across that customer base and the customers that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So our journey has taken us from working with the community banks within the US and in most recent years, we've started to work with the tier one financial institutions across the US as well. So really naturally, those conversations led us to speaking to customers who were looking to solve similar problems in Europe. And so that's what led us to really do a deeper dive on our financial crime, our global report that you might have seen last year, also available on our website, and just look at specific insights into what was happening in Europe. So, in the report, we certainly called out that this is an epidemic. And when you look at the numbers, I think, that certainly underpins that statement, 750 billion in losses. 100 billion specifically to fraud. And what I thought was really interesting in what we saw in the numbers, that about a quarter of those fraud losses are actually being contributed to cross-border illicit crimes. So if you're not looking at cross-border with respect to your monitoring, that's a quarter of financial crime that you mightn't be able to mitigate. So a really interesting insight in the report.
So one of the other parts of this that I want to hear you talk about a bit is, again, some of the countries identified. It's all in the report. But then I also, you spoke to the report looked at 270 AML-related professionals across Europe, and you interviewed them about the biggest concerns. And those percentages are pretty interesting. Probably some of our colleagues in the U.S. would have some of the same responses, I would imagine. But I do want to talk about that. But first, what surprised you, if anything, in terms of some of the dollar losses in some of the countries? Again, you did it by a percentage of GDP. Just give us a couple of examples from the report.
Sure. I think from a financial crime perspective, we've been working with customers in financial crime specifically, again, for over 20 years. So nothing really surprises us when it comes to financial crime and what we continue to see kind of year over year with respect to its growth. Specifically, I think that when you kind of zero in on the underlying kind of human impact, and you think about elder abuse in particular, and crimes that are specifically targeting our vulnerable populations, I think that that was a little bit of a surprise to us. Although, when we're speaking with our customers, when we're speaking with our coworkers, as much as we see it on a day-to-day basis, I think we're even starting to see that in our own personal lives. And there's many tables that I sit at, and not only, again, are we seeing the impacts from a customer perspective, but I know even myself personally, I've had my parents kind of fall victim to a scam. So that was an interesting insight as far as what we've seen in the report, and what was kind of a surprise. If anything, it's to surprise us this day and age.
Just to give folks a snapshot, some of the dollar losses in the European Union, 61.5 billion, UK was 33, little over 33, and the Nordic region, 3.4 billion. So all of these jurisdictions are facing similar challenges. And then to your point, and I have a relative who was in a situation where I think law enforcement thought he was a money mule, but he was in fact, I just say, clueless about what was going on. And sort of that same example that you see where you're brought into something, you think you're helping, but you're moving generally small dollar amounts. Turns out at the end of the day, he was one of many that an organized group was targeting. In any event, it took, and I think we've done some programming on this. This isn't off topic. You've done the same thing. You talk about your parents and others. We've done some programming where you talk to people who were victims, and one of the things they say is how long it took them to realize they were victims. And even when families step in and say, "No, this is too good to be true," sort of thing. So I think a lot of this from us, not so much as AML professionals, but as family members, is to provide as much clarity, I guess, and listen and that sort of thing. Again, I know you've seen it, I've seen it, but that's also interesting to me that it's going on in Europe and other places. So it's obviously not just a U.S. issue or a Canadian issue. It's happening everywhere where people are being taken advantage of, and that's another thing that we do as AML professionals. We can help in that space, and I know that you've done that in your career as well.
Absolutely. If you think about the complexity that banks and AML professionals are operating under, and if you think about, trying to keep up with changing regulation, also while, criminals are able to move faster throughout the system, move to channels that are moving faster. If you think about our real-time payment rails, and the fact that they're not bound by borders. So, criminals are moving as fast in Europe of what we've seen in our customer base in the US. And banks and our financial crime professionals are really trying to understand that complexity and adapt to it in a way that is going to allow us to kind of stay ahead of how fast these criminals can move.
Yeah, I think that's right. So let's go to when you surveyed these AML professionals in Europe. They gave you a response to what are some of the threats of greatest concern. So tell us a bit about some of that. Some of the percentages, like we just mentioned money mules, and that came out on top basically at 36%. But talk a bit about some of that, what you learned, because I find that when you use statistics from government agencies, very valuable, but use statistics from surveying of the professionals they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to say it's a better metric, but that certainly helps add to whatever the government says, here's what we're finding, and then you're saying, and here's what the professionals that are doing the investigating are seeing as well.
Absolutely. I think that what we found interesting in particular was less than a quarter of AML professionals believe that they had adequate resources to keep up with how fast these criminals are able to evolve. And again, the speed to the channels that they're operating on. So we certainly found that incredibly interesting. And when you think about some of the tools that are available to us today, I mean, we're really in a position from a technology standpoint to be able to help and supplement there. So I think, as we look to work with our customers, we're going to see tools like our Copilot be absolutely critical in being able to help them as they mitigate, not believing that they are resourced in order to keep up with how fast this criminal activity is moving and changing and adapting, to be able to help them scale those teams.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Verafin started off working with smaller institutions, and now you work with larger institutions. Even the smaller institutions have that need for technology. I think that's pretty clear in 2025. It's, if we had this conversation 10 years ago, it might have been harder to get, not to convince the community bank they need to do it, but the resource struggles might have been tougher. But nowadays, companies like yourself and others realize that those smaller banks, they need very similar, if not the same tools as the larger institutions, right?
They absolutely do, especially as they move towards real-time payments. These
Yeah.
payments are moving in an instant, and if we're not in a position to leverage technology, we're not going to be able to stay ahead of how fast those criminals can move on those channels.
So some of the other threats from your survey, again, we mentioned money mules, elder abuse came in at 33%, organized crime at 32%, card fraud still an issue, obviously, even though there's a lot of good technology that prevents people once they identify that they've been scammed, to get replacements and all that, but still at 29%, pretty high. Corruption is an interesting topic. We're not today going to talk about how corruption is handled in different jurisdictions. But I would argue that given some of the pausing going on in the U.S., it's going to be even more important for Europe to pay attention to anti-bribery and corruption rules and laws and that sort of thing. And so the fact that it's 23% of a concern of folks outside the U.S. doesn't surprise me. And then, human trafficking, as we both know, that's an issue that touches so much of society, and it's been a problem for a long time. But the banking industry, probably in the past 15 years, has gotten a lot better at identifying and reporting human trafficking. But I assume that didn't surprise you. That's a great concern to the AML professionals as well.
It's 100% a concern, and I think that as AML professionals, we can look at all of these numbers, and of course they're quite jarring. 750 billion in lost funds, but again, when you take that next step and look at the actual human impact and some of the crimes that are underpinning these dollar values, at the end of the day, that's when it becomes so important to elevate these issues and to really move towards working together at solutions, because the crimes are horrendous. We're talking about human trafficking. We're talking about elder abuse, and our customers are certainly rallying around that cause and looking for solutions there.
Another part of your report that I found interesting was, I would call it the summary or the conclusions from both the folks you surveyed and your and Verafin as well, and that's you highlight the pressing need for action. So you have at least three areas that have areas of needed improvement, I guess is the best way to describe it. You want to walk through those a little bit. Obviously one of them is collaboration, information sharing. I know Verafin has been a strong believer in that for as long as I've known of your company. But talk about some of those pressing needs for action that you glean from both the survey and plus your own expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first of all, it starts with really kind of prioritizing and elevating the issues. And I think the financial crime report is kind of a piece of that, and our ability to really kind of highlight the issues and a call to higher prioritization for solutions there. Collaboration across sectors and borders in particular is going to be key. And I think we have a great precedent that's set in the US with how we're able to share information when it comes to financial crime under the safe harbor of 314B. So certainly more of those types of activities can really help. Again, thinking about over a quarter of crimes going cross-border, and the need to just be able to open up the realm of collaboration. And I think technology is really a third. Certainly, criminals aren't bound by having to go through certain, understanding regulation when it comes to the adoption of AI. They just simply don't have the same barriers to adoption. And so us really making sure that our customers and the industry is able to adopt everything that AI can enable us to do is also super important.
Yeah, and the other area, something that we're dealing with in the U.S. back in 2021, there was a announcement of 8 priorities that law enforcement and regulators together with some consensus within the industry, they came up with these 8 priorities in the U.S., which are relevant in every place that you guys have footprints as well. And one of your other needs for action is to align on those priorities. So I think there's a combination of needs there, right? There's what are the priorities, and there are things like corruption and human trafficking, some of the stuff we already talked about,
Mhm.
but also that there's some direction from the regulatory world as to how to address those. In your survey or in maybe some of the interviews, did the respondents talk at all about regulatory oversight, not whether it's weak or strong, but just in general, what role that plays in measuring success in financial crime prevention? Did that come up in any of the interviews?
In the customer conversations that we've been a part of, certainly clearer kind of call to action with respect to regulations has certainly been a topic of conversation. Just really wanting to understand, what a definition of good looks like. But there's some, regardless of needing kind of clearer and concise outcomes, our customers are really still looking at those underlying crimes that kind of underpin these big numbers that we're talking about, and working towards solutions actively. From our customer perspective, we're working with them on what they're seeing from a crime perspective, really, taking that information, seeing if we can have more targeted analytics that really kind of root out those specific types of crimes that are top of mind for them. So regardless of regulation, we're certainly working with our customers. Again, at the end of the day, our customers believe that they are crime fighters, financial crime fighters, and we work with them under that capacity, which I think is really incredible work.
The other aspect of the financial crime prevention world is partnership, right? So it's working with the private and public sector. So outside of the regulatory partnership is a little different because obviously they have to supervise and they have to, it's almost like auditors take a look at your systems. But law enforcement around the globe, I think, has said for years, and certainly the private sector agrees, that partnering together works very well, not just in terms of metrics, but in having better and stronger investigations. Did that come up as well? Because I know you have relationships with government entities and law enforcement as well. So, and it's sort of I don't say it's a softball question because I think everybody agrees the partnership is important. But what did you learn? In your customer interviews regarding that?
The partnership is important. Of course, everybody does agree. What we've heard consistently, I think over this in the last 5 years in particular, is a real need for a stronger feedback loop. And so, in the customers that we work with, it really kind of depends on the relationship that exists. And in some parts, that feedback loop is stronger than in other jurisdictions, but that need for a feedback loop on some of the reports that they're filing and what the outcomes are. So, we can do more of what's really leading to the outcome that we all want.
Yeah, I think that's right. Feedback becomes particularly important, whether it's simply where are the major crimes occurring in terms of geographically, where
Yep.
typologies, as we know,
Typologies.
red flags, all those sorts of things become pretty important. I'm going to ask you to sort of predict where we're going to be going in a bit, but before I do that, what other reports and studies are Verafin, are you guys working on, or people can expect on a regular basis? Where can people get additional information from all the good data that you guys have been able to come up with?
You can absolutely head to our website. We release a Cloud Insight report, and we'll be doing more of this work on a broader scale moving forward. So certainly expect to see more from us with respect to the Global Financial Crime Report.
In the report, was there any reference besides the crimes that we listed to some of the product uses, things like cryptocurrency? What's again high level? Not asking you to go in the weeds here. High level, what's Verafin's thought, not on crypto, but just in general? That is a way of moving illicit funds. It's
It is a
certainly
way.
not the majority way, but it's getting a lot of press lately, both here and around the globe. What are your general thoughts on cryptocurrency and the use of it by criminal actors in some cases?
Absolutely. So, when if anything that Verafin does, it's in close partnership with our customers. So we're staying very close to our customers and understanding how their needs are developing across crypto, real-time payments, and any other particular channel that they're looking to leverage that criminals can also leverage. So We of course are seeing the conversation be elevated in the past couple of quarters around crypto, but again, also being elevated is real-time payments and any other kind of channel that criminals might be able to leverage. So you can head to our website and see specifically the needs that we cover with respect to any of those channels for more information on our coverage there.
So I'll get you out of here on this. Putting on or looking at your crystal ball, whatever metaphor you want to use. Obviously, fraud has expanded exponentially, as we both know, in the past 5 to 10 years. Whether it's from the pandemic, whether it's from different jurisdictions handling government payment, whatever it is, fraud continues to sort of drive the train, if you will. Money laundering still a major issue, sanctions evasion as well. What do you see in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of this? You've already talked about the importance of technology. Obviously, we all know we need to be current and train and all that. So if you're talking to, a college class, or you're talking to new analysts who just started whatever company they're working for, what are some of the things you want to tell them about besides what's happening today, what you see continuing to challenge all of us going forward?
Absolutely. I think, we're going to see more of what we're seeing today, and that's just an increased complexity in the operating environment that our financial institutions are facing. So we're going to be no doubt dealing with changes in regulation and how we're going to be able to adapt there. We're going to watch crimes as they evolve, depending on what the real-time payments. Not only are they evolving, but they're able to move with speed that we've never seen before. So in the next 5 years, I can only imagine at the speed that they're going to be able to move and leverage the system. And just those types of crimes, we're going to see different typologies, no doubt, evolve over time. Once we get really great monitoring in on one channel, what we've seen is criminals just move to the next one and learn how to leverage that. So we're certainly going to see more on all those three fronts, no doubt.
Stephanie Champion, I really appreciate you taking some time today to share your insight. Again, the report finds that 750 billion in money laundering illicit funds flowed through Europe in 2023. The subtitle is more than a quarter of the activity was across borders, as Stephanie already mentioned, and they do talk about cross-border flows and money mule activity. Any final takeaways for folks? Because obviously we're both part of a community that we're passionate about. Obviously, hopefully what we do matters. Anything else you'd like to leave the audience with?
Absolutely. I think I'll leave the audience with a number pulled from our global financial crime report, and that's 3.1 trillion in money laundering and terrorist financing on a global scale, and 500 billion in fraud losses. And just a reminder that, we talked about the complexity of the operating environment for our financial institutions, and of course, criminals aren't bound by banks, borders, or regulation. So they're just not dealing with that same level of complexity. Again, a financial crime epidemic. I think the numbers certainly speak for themselves, and looking forward to just playing a bigger role in this ecosystem as we look for a solution towards the problem of financial crime.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, John.